When Charles I ascended the throne in 1625, he inherited not only England's long-standing political tensions, but also new and urgent problems created at the end of his father's reign. Parliament already distrusted Charles and deeply despised his chief favourite, the Duke of Buckingham. Charles's troubles began almost immediately. In May 1625, only 2 months after becoming king, he married Henrietta Maria of France, a Roman Catholic princess. Parliament strongly opposed this union, fearing that it would make the king sympathetic to Catholic causes at home and abroad. Charles also angered Puritans. In 1626, he protected a critic of Calvinist doctrine from Puritan authorities, and his personal taste for ceremonial, high church Anglican worship made Puritans suspicious that he was drifting toward Catholicism. Although Charles was not Catholic, he favoured bishops, ornate services, and churchmen who rejected Calvinist predestination, positions Puritans found alarming. When Charles became king, Parliament refused to follow tradition by granting him lifetime revenues, a practice that had existed since the 1400s. Instead, they approved only a 1-year renewable grant, hoping to limit his independence. Parliament demanded that Charles continue an expensive war in support of Protestants in Germany, yet refused to provide the funds necessary to sustain it, placing him in an impossible position. If he chose to make peace with Spain, he would be condemned by Parliament as pro-Catholic, but if he attempted to raise money independently to continue the war, he would be accused of tyranny. With no viable options, Charles was ultimately backed into a corner and turned to extra-parliamentary financial measures. To raise money without relying on Parliament, Charles adopted a series of controversial measures. He levied new tariffs and duties, attempted to revive old and discontinued taxes, and imposed a forced loan on his subjects that was theoretically repayable. Those who refused to comply were imprisoned, and during periods of military mobilization, troops were quartered in private homes, further increasing resentment among the population. These actions, in the eyes of many Englishmen, violated their ancient rights. When Parliament met again in 1628, anger was widespread. Taxes had been illegally collected, the war was going poorly, and Charles's blunders had brought France into the conflict alongside Spain. Parliament agreed to grant new funds only if Charles accepted the Petition of Right. The Petition of Right set clear limits on the king's authority by prohibiting several key abuses. It declared that taxation without Parliament's consent was illegal, banned the quartering of soldiers in private homes, and forbade the declaration of martial law during peacetime. It also protected subjects from arbitrary arrest and imprisonment, reinforcing the principle that the monarch must govern according to the law. Charles reluctantly accepted it, hoping to secure funds, but his acceptance only encouraged Parliament to push for even greater limits on royal power. Later in 1628, Charles suffered a major blow. Buckingham was assassinated. With his most trusted advisor gone, Charles grew even more defensive and suspicious. In January 1629, tensions reached a dramatic peak when members of the House of Commons physically held the Speaker in his chair to prevent him from adjourning the session. During this defiant moment, they passed resolutions condemning Charles's innovations in religion, referring to high church policies that they believed moved dangerously close to Catholic practices, and denounced his efforts to impose taxation without Parliament's consent. Declaring these acts treasonous left Charles no choice. He arrested the leaders and dissolved Parliament. He then vowed not to call it again, a promise he kept for 11 years. From 1629 to 1640, Charles ruled without Parliament in a period often known as his personal rule. To maintain financial stability during this time, he made peace with France in 1629 and Spain in 1630, significantly reducing the costs of war. He also cut government spending and increasingly stretched royal prerogative to generate revenue. In doing so, Charles revived and expanded traditional levies, most notably ship money, a tax originally intended for coastal defense, which he controversially extended across the entire kingdom. During this period, Charles continued to alienate a wide range of groups through his policies and actions. Puritans grew increasingly hostile due to his support for high church Anglican practices and his perceived leniency toward Catholics. Landowners were angered when he attempted to restrict enclosure, which threatened their economic interests, while members of the middle class resented his efforts to regulate wages. Despite this widespread dissatisfaction, one crucial element was still missing: a clear opportunity for organised resistance. That opportunity came, ironically, from Scotland. In 1637, Charles ordered the Scots to adopt a new prayer book based on High Church Anglican ideas. Scotland, however, was far more strictly Presbyterian than England. When a bishop tried to introduce the new service in Edinburgh, a woman famously threw a stool at him. Riots erupted, leading to the formation of the Solemn League and Covenant, a Presbyterian alliance. The Scots abolished bishops entirely and seized Edinburgh Castle. Charles needed an army to restore control, but lacked the funds to raise one. He was therefore forced, after 11 years, to call Parliament in 1640. Once convened, the House of Commons refused to vote money until it addressed its grievances. Parliament now came to represent a broad coalition of opposition to Charles's rule, uniting several aggrieved groups with different but overlapping concerns. Landowners resented his financial abuses and arbitrary methods of raising revenue. Merchants were angered by his economic policies that disrupted trade and stability, and Puritans were increasingly determined to push for reforms within the Church of England, opposing what they saw as a drift toward Catholic practices. Between 1640 and 1641, Parliament took decisive action to curb royal power and dismantle the mechanisms that had supported Charles's rule. They tried and executed Thomas Wentworth, the Earl of Strafford and the King's chief minister, and impeached Archbishop of Canterbury William Laud, a central figure in the King's religious policies. Parliament also abolished powerful royal courts such as the Star Chamber and the High Commission, which had been used to enforce the King's authority, and it outlawed taxation without parliamentary consent while declaring ship money illegal. Furthermore, they established that no more than 3 years could pass between parliamentary sessions and that Parliament could not be dissolved without its own consent. Through these sweeping measures, Parliament effectively destroyed the legal foundation for royal absolutism. Despite this initial unity, Parliament soon fractured over the issue of religious reform, leading to the emergence of 2 major Puritan factions. The Presbyterians, who were more moderate in their views, sought to establish a national Calvinist church governed by councils of elders and opposed both the authority of bishops and the use of the Book of Common Prayer. In contrast, the Independents were more radical, advocating for fully autonomous congregations and rejecting any form of centralized church structure altogether. Conservatives in Parliament still supported the traditional Church of England, but many fled to join the King when the Civil War broke out in 1642. Division intensified in 1641 when rebellion erupted in Ireland. To suppress it, Parliament needed an army. But Puritans argued that Charles could not be trusted with military command and insisted that Parliament control the armed forces. To Royalists, this was an unprecedented attack on monarchy itself. By 1642, the breakdown of trust was complete, and England descended into civil war.